on our peace meeting, Audacity of Peace, and our panel, The Art of Living Together in a Shattered World. We will have this panel as a moment of reflection, and we will have the input of most qualified men, and I will try to coordinate them. And afterwards, we will have the occasion to listen to you, to have your input or questions, and they will respond. For those who have been yesterday afternoon also in this room, I see our friend Mr. Samak, we talked already about this shattered world in the area of globalization. And I think today's reflection will help us to begin to respond and how to live in this shattered world. We heard it last days. This shattered world means a world that has difficulty to find a new center, to find a new unity, to find a common destiny. There is too many inequality, as we heard already in the inauguration when we heard the testimony of the Afghan woman that was very touching about the lack of equal opportunities in this world. If we think about the huge, enormous ecological problem that touches most of all the poor countries and the poor in general. So it's not difficult to find our starting point. What is our mission and how do we want and how do we can create unity and peace in a world that is in big difficulty and in lack of peace and unity. And this panel says we want to promote a living together. The living together, I think, is in the DNA of every religion, because every religion is talking about me and the other. The other, God, but the other also our neighbor. And the living together is one of the big challenges of this world of the many diversities everywhere where we go. But the title, the first word of our panel is the art of living together. We are speaking about an art. That means, I don't know if we have artists in the room, but every artist will know that to practice an art, you have to exercise. You have to be patient and you have to applicate and to try again. An art means a choice. We can choose for living together. An art means too that you can learn it. And that's, I think, a hopeful message. Even the ones who say that they are not so artistic. So I think all our words of this morning, we will help to understand better how to practice this art of living together in this shattered world. We know that art is related to beauty, and beauty means something that attracts, not only that convinces intellectually, but attracts. So we like to be there because it's beautiful, because it makes us happy, and it makes that everyone find this place. So I think all these elements, of course, I don't want to say what our distinguished guests have to say, but I think just to introduce you into the theme of this morning's reflection. And we are very happy to welcome this most distinguished and qualified speakers on our panel. Before I introduce them, I would like to apologize our friend from Iran, who unfortunately got ill. He has a fever, so we wish him to get better soon. Then we have the first man on my left, on your right, Mr. Kulkarni Sudh is an Indian intellectual and a writer. He has been participating in our meetings for a lot of years. And he began his long political career in the 90s. He was one of the most active promoters of the Observer Research Hindu Foundation, an influential Indian think tank of which he is the president. He didn't want to tell to me, but I know that he has millions of followers on his account. So he is an important influencer of this area. Then we will have, if I'm well informed, a professor who comes here for the first time, as we are in Germany, a German professor, Martin Leiner, who is professor of systematic theology and ethics at the University of Jena. And he chairs the Jena Center for Reconciliation Studies since its foundation in 2013. So we are very happy that we are with the spirit of Assisi in your country now. Then we go to the right and we go to another old friend of these peace meetings, Mr. Tariq Mitri, who is director of the St. George University of Beirut, so he's magnifico. He's an academic. He held several government positions in Lebanon between 2005 and 11, and from 12 to 14, he was special representative and head of the UN support mission in Libya. He was director of the Issam Fairs Institute for the Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut, and currently he is rector of the St. George University. Then we have Mr. Abdul Mukti. I think he participated also other times at our meetings. He is the Secretary General of the Muhammadiyah movement in Indonesia, an important Muslim movement in Indonesia that has agreements of collaboration with Sant'Egidio for a lot of years. He is the Secretary General of his movement, which carries out its activities mainly in the social and educational fields, and he chairs the Indonesian Conference on Religion and Peace. And last but not least, we have another old friend of our meetings, the Archbishop Ulrich, the Archbishop of Paris. I think we began to know him when he was Archbishop of Chambéry and then of Lille, and now he is Archbishop in the beautiful city of Paris since a year. So, you see, we have a very qualified panel of people representing very different worlds, but all looking to live this art of living together in our today's world. Every speaker can have 10 minutes of introduction, and after, at the end, you will have the time to intervene. So thank you, and please, I give the floor to Mr. Kulkarni.
Good morning, friends. It's an honor, privilege to be part of this conference in which representatives of diverse religions, cultures, and humanistic philosophies and traditions gathered together to call for peace and to work for peace. I thank the community of Sant'Egidio for inviting me to this important conference. It's important because it's taking place in the historic city of Berlin. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 became a source of hope and inspiration for the entire world, for a world that had grown weary of enmity, violence, and destruction. There was also a corresponding hope that global cooperation, combined with rapidly increasing productive powers of science and technology, would spur inclusive global development, and that globalization would help in removing the scourge of poverty, hunger, and disease that had degraded and that have continued to degrade the lives of millions of our sisters and brothers around the world. Sadly, these hopes were belied by the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and many conflicts in Africa. Europe seemed immune to such conflicts, but the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war has belied this myth also. Furthermore, the specter of a new Cold War between the United States and China is now looming large. Asia, from where I come, seemed safe from the poisonous logic of military blocs and wasteful arms race it produces. But now, the global weapons industry is vigorously pushing the idea of an Asian NATO to contain the alleged threat from China. Dear friends, what does all this tell us? It tells us that there is some vital wisdom missing in the world we live in. That missing wisdom is encapsulated in the theme of this session, the art and culture of living together in a shattered world. Two questions arise. One, why is the culture of living together missing? And two, what should we all do together to promote it? An examination of these two questions must begin with an understanding of what we mean by culture. Culture is a word most widely used, but sadly understood at a very shallow level. Culture is what humanizes the human species. Culture is what elevates and transforms the human species from biological evolution to a higher civilizational and moral evolution. The test of morality and civilization is a willingness, ability, and action to distinguish right from wrong, good from evil, just from unjust, creation from destruction, care from indifference, love from hatred, and non-violence from violence in all its various manifestations. War, which is the grossest and the ugliest manifestation of violence, also signifies that the human race is afflicted with an evolutionary disability. Evolutionary disability. This disability appears in the form of stunted growth of its faculty of love, which is indispensable for the culture of living together. Mahatma Gandhi said something very profound when he explained love as the active form of non-violence and peace building. Love as the active form of non-violence and peace building. However, This evolutionary disability to love one another is not fundamental, permanent, and incurable. In the course of our evolution as a unique species, in the course of civilizing ourselves, we humans have created institutions and belief systems that are rooted in the soil of love, nurtured with the water of care, and protected by the hands of cooperation and solidarity. Two of the trees that grew out of the soil of love, two of the institutions that are the best examples of humanizing institutions are family and community. It is in family and community that we see the inspiring manifestation of love. And when we talk about family friends, we must pay tribute to the women of the world, to all the mothers of the world, who not only sustain their respective families, but they sustain the entire human race. However, so far, human communities have not adequately developed the culture of harmoniously living together in other collectives and institutions that require acceptance of diversities of culture, race, ethnicity, nationality, class, and caste. This has happened because of ignorance, prejudice, and insecurity, born out of lack of mutual understanding, empathy, and trust. Insecurity is also fomented by fears generated by hate propaganda, by manipulative political and governance systems. There is another factor that impairs the culture of living together. Our systems of economy, with partial exceptions, perpetuate disparities. They favor unhealthy competition over cooperation. They compel people to spend their lives in the coils of consumerism, and they are ill-suited to promote harmony between human beings and also between human beings and Mother Nature. My fellow peace builders, how can we change this reality and advance the art and culture of living together locally as well as globally? I would like to briefly present 5 action points. First, the world we live in is the most interdependent and interconnected in all of human history. But our hearts and minds are not adequately connected. We have erected many invisible walls that separate nations and communities, especially faith-based communities. Therefore, we must uncompromisingly break all the Berlin walls that divide humanity with notions of exclusivism, self-sufficiency, superiority, supremacy, and hegemony based on religion, ethnicity, and nationality. My second idea, the idea of exclusive and non-negotiable national sovereignty has become incompatible with the demands of today's interconnected and interdependent world. Without maximum international cooperation, it is impossible for the human race to find solutions to wars, the climate crisis, or the multiple crises impeding human development. My third suggestion, our common human identity must take precedence over all our other identities. This was proclaimed by the Vedas, the sacred scripture of Hinduism, over 5,000 years ago. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, said the Rig Veda. It means the entire world is one single family. This recognition that we all belong to one common human family precludes any justification for war, violence, or even indifference. This is why the world must heed the call of His Holiness Pope Francis, who has asked the international community to replace the globalization of indifference with the globalization of solidarity and charity. Replace the globalization of indifference with the globalization of solidarity, and charity. My fourth idea, limiting national sovereignty and building strong bonds of charity and solidarity within the human family inevitably points to the need for strengthening global governance that protects justice, human dignity, and security for every human being on earth. The best way to strengthen global governance is by strengthening the one apex organization we already have, and that is the United Nations. The United Nations was created out of the ashes of the two world wars. Weak and ineffective though it may be today, it is the only institution that commands recognition and respect globally. However, the United Nations is in urgent need of radical restructuring and democratization so that it can respond to the needs of the 21st century. Bigger and more powerful nations, such as the United States of America, China, India, European Union, have a bigger responsibility to ensure democratization of the United Nations and democratization of global governance. My fifth and last idea, friends, is this. Once we recognize that we all belong to one common and indivisible global human family, it follows that the United Nations must declare every war of aggression as illegitimate and a crime against humanity. It also follows that all disputes among nations must be resolved through peaceful and non-military means of dialogue, and therefore, all industries engaged in weapons of production, especially nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, must be dismantled. Simultaneously, the attention, resources, and energies of the international community must be redirected solely towards removing the developmental disparities around the world, improving the living conditions of all the marginalized communities, and protecting the precious and fragile biodiversity on planet Earth from the looming climate calamity. Therefore, let all of us pledge in this historic and highly cultured city of Berlin to work towards enriching the art and culture of living together in today's shattered world. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May peace prevail and triumph all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kulkarni, for these words of wisdom that you gave us today. And then we give the floor to our German panelist, the Professor Martin Leiner. He will speak in English too, so thank you for that.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. I'm a professor for systematic theology in Germany, so Protestant theologian, and my specialization are reconciliation studies. So my answer for the art of living together in a shattered world is clear: reconciliation will be the answer. So, but what is reconciliation? How can it happen? And is it enough? Don't we need something plus, reconciliation plus something? And this plus I will also talk in my last point about. So first of all, introduction, what is reconciliation? Reconciliation is about the creation of trustful and better relationships after grave incidents. And in the political sphere, such grave incidents are often wars, civil wars, genocides, colonialism, apartheid, and other similar human rights violations, dictatorships also, and torture. And how to achieve reconciliation? we need a lot of different measures to come to reconciliation, and we have to think human being in a web of relationships to understand this. This is what we learned in this those studies, and the measures go from demobilization and demilitarization, disarmament, over reparation, truth commissions, changes in education, trauma therapies, works also, for example, on common mourning, on memory culture, and so on. And especially 3 points I want to stress that we don't misunderstand reconciliation. So reconciliation does not mean to give up. Reconciliation means to work on justice, to give the victims a voice, and to work through the past and to heal the past, and not to keep quiet and to make people to shut their mouths. Second thing is, we also don't forgive evil deeds. We don't forgive torture or genocide. We forgive persons. This means that we trust persons, that they are more than the evil deeds they did, and that they can do better, and that we can have a better relationship with them. But we don't justify or understand and legitimize evil deeds. This is not reconciliation. This requires that people separate from those evil things. And the third thing is also, we also not reconcile with the evil things we lived, but we must reconcile with our life where evil things are part. I am the person who have to live that I lost my hand in a war. I am the person who has to live that I was in prison unjustly 5 years, and so on. So we have to live to reconcile with our lives and with a society where also the perpetrators are present, and we have also to reconcile with a world where such things are possible, which raises also the question about the Creator and about God or whatever we are believing in, how this is possible and how this can be part of this world. Now I take the words of the topic from the end to the beginning. Second point, a shattered world. Yes, we are living in a shattered world. This is even more to say than a fragmented world, fragmentierte Welt, as it's in the German topic. This world is shattered physically by climate change, by scarcity of water, loss of biodiversity, by pollution of the oceans, and so far. It is also shattered emotionally because bonds between people are destroyed by an overload of threat of nuclear war, threat of poverty, threat of not having enough to live, threat of debts people are in, threat of exclusion, and also threats of total control of the population by new totalitarian systems. There's also a threat of for democracies to be changed and to lose their quality as defenders of human rights, of division of powers, so of the different instances, law, legislative and executive, and also of there is also a fear of an overload by changes we cannot manage anymore. Always new technologies make your capacities more or less useless or not interesting. And there are also other changes. For example, when I was born in 1960 in Germany, 97.5% were members of the two big Christian churches. Now we are not even 50% together, Roman Catholics and Protestants. And this is a big change that organized religion in Germany, at least, has become much weaker. So In this shattered world, however, not everything is shattered. And this is a very important insight, because in the actual situation, we live, that many people think what will save us are either utopias, possibilities, how the world could be, or is this the total threat of human self-destruction? But both are not bringing us really together. And this insight, I think, is not everywhere arrived. Utopias, we saw it, communism, liberalism, brought divisiveness in the world. And there should have been a huge reconciliation process between those ideas so that utopias could have helped us to be together. But it did not work, and there is still a lot of work to do to bring us together. And fear is even worse. What will be the reaction on the fear? That will be a politics of save himself who can, in many cases, to close countries against immigration. The super rich people are now even searching to live in space and to let this world as it is. There is a lot of different answers on threats, and it will not create human unity. This can be a driving force, the threat and the utopia, but we need something which is already there, and this what is already there. I think this is two things. One is a very simple thing, that is that we live the positivity in this world, the beauty of being together, the beauty of friendship, of a good relationship, a good encounter with a person. And this is something to value much more. The good experiences with nature, which is like a paradise in some moments still. And the second thing, between this simple thing, is also the hope religions bring us. And this hope is not very different. All religions more or less believe that God is good, that we are God's children, that somehow God is here in this world. And I give you a Christian version. In 2 Corinthians 5, verse 19 is said, God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself and gave us a ministry of reconciliation. So this means this world is already reconciled, and there is already God between us. We have not to find something new. It is already there. We are already all God's children and have God's love and reconciliation. So this, if we are based on such ideas that something is already there, we can work on and build on, the art of living together is, I think, much easier. Living together, this means, yes, reconciling with persons, going the way to find common views, to work through also the negative things we lived with each other. And also the other thing is to make friends and to go together the way of overcoming the bad things, to transform, to life will change this world together and to make it a more livable place. Fourth point, the art of living together. When we speak of an art, art always means a rupture with the normal reality. A painting is in a frame, it's not just like this. So it's separated from the world. A music which is played normally, people come together and it said, stop, now we play. Music, please listen. At least since Haydn, and we have so-called absolute music in our music culture. So it's something different. Artists always want to be an avant-garde, want to be different. And so we also need a certain rupture with the culture and the systems we are living in. Without this, we cannot be artists of living together. We must have a certain distance to our roles in society. And an art is not a science or a technique. Of course, there are techniques needed also in art, and science is always very important. This is my life normally, my professional life. But art creates surprises. Art is not previsible. It brings something new, and there should also be the spirit to surprise for the art of living together, to surprise people with good things, to bring them something for their birthday they did not expect, or whatever, to say something other people did not expect, and to open the heart for each other. So the art is very important, and I invite you, and we are invited to become all artists of living together. But is this enough today? Are we really prepared to the storms which will come? Are we prepared to the attacks on democracies, attacks on human rights, the fights for resources with a growing population in the world, growing political radicalism? I don't think so. I think we should also think about other things to develop. And those other things, I have 6 points. One is we should not be bystanders. There is from the research on genocides and atrocities this result that perpetrators try against minority groups they want to victimize, how far they can go. And if the majority or somebody else stops them, they also go not further. So there is often this experience, even if it needs to be courageous and to take risks, that you can stop, and everybody can stop violence if they don't go with it. This is quite well researched by researchers like Erwin Staub. Second point, militant democracy. Democracy is often attacked by political parties, which are parties who are working together with very aggressive and anti-human groups, or which are the followers and the following parties of ancient groups who were very aggressive, and they took power. They are now ruling sometimes, and they are still the spirits of the old KGB or of old Hindu nationalism or of the old military dictatorship in Brazil under the last Brazilian government. They are all present there. And in Germany we have also such a party who is thinking like this. And I think we should take again this idea of militant democracy, which means that we should prevent those groups from reorganizing politically and also undermining institutions like police or secret services. The third thing is what to do with extremists. To prevent them from political action does not mean that we are not willing to have a contact with them. We should discuss with extremists. And Václav Havel had an interesting method. He said every extremist had an initial idea which can be understood and might be legitimate. And we should come back to these initial ideas they have and bring them to a more middle ground position and acknowledge also the relative right of some extremist ideas in the beginning. The fourth point is people do not learn nonviolent resistance. Therefore, we can talk a lot about not fighting with weapons, but we need to teach and learn nonviolent resistance. Fifth point, we should oppose to the weapon and the selling of weapons, like also our colleague said. And the sixth point is also to integrate actively over separations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor, to share with us your view on a new step after crisis difficulties, that is to build a reconciled world. And thank you so much. And now we are very happy to give the floor to Professor Tariq Mitri from Lebanon. I think he will speak in English too. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. I'm very pleased to be with you this morning. You know, living together as people of different faith requires, first and foremost, an openness to question one's own self-understanding and be open to the understanding of others in their own terms. Today's world, our mutual perceptions are blurred. Modernization has had great secularizing effects, in some places more than in others, but it has also provoked movements of counter-secularization. In some extreme cases, people fight in the name of religions in which they ceased to believe. There are conflicts between communities that have a religious past, but their religious content today is of no relevance. Religions in which people have sometimes little faith continue to define communities in which they have more faith in communities than in religions that made those communities. In the Muslim world, ideological thought patterns represent the West as selfish, materialistic, and dominating. In the West, the equivalent thought patterns perceive Islam as irrational, fanatical, and expansionist. In the age of global communication and migration, these thought patterns foster further antagonism. Such constructs, and they are constructs, are exacerbated by what you may call the paradox of globalization. Globalization has produced, as you all know, cultural uniformization, and the more individuals and people look alike, the more they need to affirm their difference. In many societies, people risk living in what you may call the worst of two worlds, a culturally homogeneous world and one where you seek identity and community in hostility to the others. While relations between people of different faith and cultures are strongly influenced by local and regional histories, they are increasingly impacted by world developments. Of course, religions appeal to universal loyalties, and they can be seen in certain societies as a cause of tension or conflict, but quite often they are no more than an intensifying feature of disputes whose main causes are outside religion, social or political. There are also cases where a conflict in one place, with its local cause and character, is perceived and instrumentalized by a conflict in another place. So enmities in one part of the world confer stereotypes of the enemy in another part of the world and produce revenge attacks elsewhere in the world. You burn a church in Pakistan because you're upset with US policy, not because you have a conflict with your Pakistani neighbor. It's not uncommon to see people unable or unwilling to fight those who cause their anger. They look for substitutes, and they easily find them. The neighbor as a substitute for someone remote who makes you angry. Sometimes neighbors hold each other responsible for the wrongs attributed to their co-religionists elsewhere. And unless they are prepared to dissociate themselves publicly from those with whom they share a common faith, they are accused of complicity with them. Living together in peace requires counteracting all these processes. In other words, it might be important to de-globalize interreligious and intercultural tensions. Attention to the specific local causes of conflicts helps identifying solutions. This is not possible unless the leaders of both communities refuse to be drawn into others' conflicts because of an uncritical response to calls for solidarity among adherents of one religious faith. Genuine religious faith and genuine religious convictions can constitute a basis for critical engagement with human weakness and defective social and economic orders. The dialogue, the culture of living together, and art, is the culture of the dialogue of life. And the principles are simple: citizenship, equality, the rule of law, human rights. All of this is part of the dialogue of life. But for people of faith, it is crucial to affirm the indivisibility of human rights. Human rights are not about the rights of individuals, but also sometimes the rights of peoples, of communities. Thus, human rights advocacy cannot be conditioned by confessional solidarity. Muslims defending the human rights of Muslims and Christians defending the human rights of Christians. We also have to have a lucid understanding of the relationship between violence and religion. That's what is important in the dialogue of life. Non-religious factors determining violence are quite often more important than religious factors. Before addressing the religious justification of violence, it's better to analyze every other factor that explains the eruption of violence. We are often preoccupied with the anatomy of violence, what goes on in the minds of a radical. I think what is more important than the anatomy of violence is the genealogy of violence. How does it develop historically? When some people hold traditional religious education responsible of propagating a culture of hatred, they fail to see that it is not our traditional religious values that lead people to violence, but it's the loss of those values without much in counterpart that explains frustration, grievances, and revulsion. Violence cannot be explained as a continuation of ancestral hatred, the ongoing crusade, for example. Because ancestral hatred is not a question of memory. It's a reinvention fabricated by modern violence. This is why living together by way of dialogue of life cannot obey the logic of negotiation. It implies being prepared to suspend one's value judgments, and such a suspension invites intellectual humility. And you know, when I was with the United Nations, I used the term intellectual humility before the Security Council. And the chair of the Security Council said, "Oh, he's preaching us Christianity." And I tried to say that, for that matter, the United Nations needs intellectual humility. It's not a notion only for people of religion to uphold. It is a counterpart to the predominance of a culture of arrogance. It's an arrogance that prevails among all those who wield power or think that they wield power. That's the case of the United Nations, but that's another story. And accumulate wealth. I believe intellectual humility is a condition for living together, for dialogue, for the dialogue of life. Some people think it's an invitation to relativism. I don't think it is so. It's a reminder that many issues need to be subject to doubt. In faith, there is doubt, I believe. Balancing intellectual humility and moral conviction is necessary but difficult. Respect for other people's truth claims and willingness to suspend our value judgments on the beliefs of those with whom we disagree can be a salient feature of intellectual humility. Intellectual humility does not contradict moral certainty. There have been many ways of universalizing moral certainty. People of faith have highlighted the convergence of religious commandments, the main one being the so-called golden rule, the principle of treating others as oneself wish to be treated. Others have based their moral certainty on natural law, which is common to many of us. In conclusion, we need to remind ourselves that neither the historical contingencies nor difference in color, ethnicity, language, cultural heritage, and religious affiliation militate against our common humanity. It's a simple idea. Affirming our common humanity is essential, but we need to be wary of the faceless and abstract universalism of those who speak of common humanity. The space between faceless universalism, prone to hegemonic control, and ethnocentric bigotry and religious exclusivism needs to be widened. This brings me back to where I started. Equal footing, equal participation are a necessary condition for any dialogue, especially the dialogue of life. For this reason, it is not an act of condescendence by the stronger towards the weaker. In fact, the weaker may well possess the strength, the moral strength, whether real or potential, of providing legitimacy to the mighty. Moreover, There are many people in this world who think of themselves as invincible. They need be reminded also in dialogue that they are vulnerable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Mitri, because I think you have been talking to us as a great intellectual, a man with very high and important political responsibilities, and a Christian. And we see in you someone who, with a big wisdom, combines the attitude of humility, which is something that you develop in the heart, together with an intellectual view to try to understand really what is going on in the other. So thank you really for that. We now go to We now will listen to Mr. Abdul Mukti. We are very pleased to give you the floor as the authoritative voice of Indonesia from Muhammadiyah movement.
Thank you, Madam. Allow me to begin my presentation by greeting Assalamualaikum, which means peace be upon you. Good morning. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be here to share my very simple contribution for this very prestigious forum, and I'm rather speaking from the perspective of an activist rather than as a philosopher. I'm rather saying and also seeing the issue from the experience of Indonesia and also my experience living and working with many different cultures and religions. And it is an honor for me as well to speak in front of Indonesian Ambassador of Indonesia for the Republic Federal of Germany. So, Excellency Arif Hafaz Ukroseno, I think you can just stand up, Pak, as Ambassador. Hopefully this introduction does not part of the 10-minute allocation, isn't it? So I might speak a bit longer. Plurality is human destiny. God created mankind in different races, ethnicities, languages, cultures, and religions. Differences do not indicate division, segregation, and supremacy of one over another. Diversity is a treasure. It is a social, cultural, intellectual, spiritual, and moral foundation for the beauty, peace, happiness, and prosperity of the world. In reality, however, differences could become sources of tensions, conflicts, or even wars among cultures, religions, and nations. These happen due to conflict of interest, superiority syndrome, greedy, extremism, hatred, and power domination. Discrimination, racism, xenophobia, and other negative behaviors toward others remain in nowadays time. It is also a reality that people from different cultural, religious, political, as well as national backgrounds could live together peacefully. Despite clash of cultures as a challenge of multicultural society, there are realities of cultural, political, and even religious and cultural convergences. People do not only live together in peace, but also building new society and new culture in very unique ways. There are at least 5 foundations for building a culture of living together. First, having positive mind toward differences with the belief that differences are human nature as the will of God. Second, accept others with full of respect and sincerity. Third, explore common values for unity, tolerance, and providing accommodation for others with full of understanding. Fourth, building common grounds based on common interests, benefits, and mutual partnership. And fifth, working together for common good and by sharing, receiving, and caring society. In building a culture of living together, we need an inclusive education. We need to open doors of education for all, wherein no discrimination, exclusion, and rejection on the basis of religions, cultures, races, and social classes. It is important to creating schools as a meeting and a melting point by intensifying interaction and cross-cultural understanding, as well as allowing students to experience living together with others from different backgrounds. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to share Indonesian experience to cultivate plurality of religions and cultural diversity. Indonesia has the Pancasila as the foundation and Bhinneka Tunggal Ika as one of the pillars of the nation. Literally, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika means unity in diversity. But in the current context and the future of the country, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika might be translated as unity is diversity, meaning that unity is not uniformity. It brings implication on the importance to build unity without negating, neglecting, or excluding diversity. We are united because we have common values of one humanity, one destiny, and one responsibility to live together in peace and harmony. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mukti, for bringing us your experience as a man of searching for unity in diversity in a such diversified country as Indonesia is. Thanking for your work on the field. You said you defined yourself as an activist, and so we thank you for sharing this experience of your big and important country. And dear friends, last but not least, we are very happy to give the floor to the Archbishop Ulrich of Paris. I think he will speak to us dans la belle langue française.
Merci.
Vu qu'on a eu la présidente de la francophonie, il faut, voilà.
En effet. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. The audacity of peace, cultivating the audacity of peace in response to the invitation of the community of Sant'Egidio, leads us to look at our world with lucidity. And when we observe it, we see the human family shattered right down to the very heart of nations. Religious and cultural differences have often been seen as divisive. But we believe that on the contrary, they can be elements of unity, and this is why we're all very happy to contribute to this forum. So I would like to say that first and foremost, the dialogue we are venturing into this morning is a perfect demonstration of the initial possibility of an understanding facilitated by our religious sensitivity and openness to transcendence. To a group of younger French speakers who were gathered in Lisbon in the middle of the summer for the World Youth Day, I suggested that we consider dialogue as the first tool offered to the Christian inspiration to create and maintain a social friendship, to quote Pope Francis. As was summarized by the Holy Father in the opening of his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, it is a matter of starting from the Christian convictions that inspire and sustain me, but seeking to make this reflection an invitation to dialogue among all people of goodwill. This fraternal dialogue, which seems to me to be the foundation of all peace, implies first and foremost being rooted in creation, as we have heard already, our common home, the human family. Has its origins in God's unique plan, and it is in creation that the human family gathers, scatters, competes for its possessions, clashes in quarrels, or builds bridges precisely to avert all forms of antagonism. But the Christian faith places before us the example of Christ, who came to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. I'm quoting the Gospel of John, chapter 11. This is the basis for the declaration of the Second Vatican Council, which offers to mankind the honest assistance of the Church in fostering that brotherhood of all men which corresponds to this destiny of theirs. Inspired by no earthly ambition, the Church seeks but one aim, to carry forward the work of Christ under the lead of the befriending Spirit. And Christ entered this world to give witness to the truth, to rescue and not to sit in judgment, to serve and not to be served. As I said earlier, this mission calls into question the very meaning of dialogue. The spirit of the world values disagreement and conflict more than anything else, and true dialogue is too often confused with a simple exchange of views and opinions. What is required is to know oneself, to be honest about one's own identity, to know where one stands. In this way, dialogue manifests an upright intention, that of seeking together a path that leads to the common good and the settlement of tensions and disputes. This is characterized first and foremost by the willingness to accept the other's point of view. But it is also a question of exchanging views so as to encourage the emergence of truth, a truth that is not simply harsh facts, but the truth of human dignity. To achieve this, everyone must reject the manipulation and accept instead openness to a transcendent truth, which, in strict compliance with the pre-requirements of genuine dialogue, is not incompatible with the pluralist society to which we belong. Now, not far from Paris, in Bussy-Saint-Georges, there is an Esplanade de Religion et de Culture, an initiative that is not giving in to syncretism, but rather encourages everyone to learn more about the faith of others, so that together we can work towards peace and harmony. It is an example of how harmony can be achieved and of the essential role the religions can play. So fraternity, peace are all ingredients of this cohesion which must be sought. In a few days' time, Pope Francis's next trip, in about 10 days' time, will take him to Marseille for the Mediterranean meetings. This is the third stage of these meetings, which were initiated by the Italian Bishops' Conference in Bari in 2020 and then in Florence in 2022. The aim of these meetings is to draw attention to the Mediterranean basin with its 5 shores: North Africa, the Middle East, the Aegean and Black Seas, the Balkan Peninsula, and Southern Europe. So we have this huge diversity, and it is this diversity which is important in these meetings. I'd like to quote my colleague, the Archbishop of Marseille, Cardinal Jean-Marc Aveline, who proposed that this third meeting be held in a city to continue a process of reflection and action to create cohesion. I'm now quoting Cardinal Aveline. Today, the countries of the Mediterranean are facing social, political, religious problems whose shadow extends far beyond the geographical area of the Mediterranean. I'm thinking of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Sunni-Shiite clashes, the tensions between Armenia and Turkey, or between Morocco and Algeria. I'm also thinking of the dramatic situation of migrants, the economic and social difficulties faced by the populations of many of the Mediterranean countries, the threats posed to this whole area by the current climate change, with all the environmental problems which this entails, in particular access to water and the weakening of relations between believers of different religions. End of quote. During this week, the next week, which goes from the 16th to the 23rd of September, not only will there be around 100 bishops from several Mediterranean countries, but also a number of young people who have agreed to speak with the bishops. These young people will include the young Israelis and Palestinians, young Greeks and Turks, Algerians and Moroccans, and also there will be some young migrants participating in this very special meeting. It's a whole process, process being the word used by Pope Francis, it's a whole process which is set to begin here. It will combine academic and theologian reflection, social, cultural, and spiritual cooperation. We know that we have theologians expected to participate, but as I said, there will also be social and cultural and spiritual cooperation between the countries affected by migration, and finally the setting into motion of a voluntary ecclesial collaboration between the dioceses present around the Mediterranean. Cardinal Aveline said, the Pope is not coming to Marseille to be looked at, but so that together and with him we can look at the Mediterranean, its challenges and the hopes that can be generated. That such a fragmented space can become a source of hope. We also share the conviction that no one is useless, especially those who live on the periphery of life, who are not often recognized. Isn't that a good criterion to assert the truth of a proposal? Well, to mention Pope Benedict XVI, in 2005, everyone is the fruit of a thought from God. Each one is wanted. Each one is loved. Each one is needed. So aren't these universal principles? This awareness of the indignity of each individual opens the way to a culture of encounter, a translation of dialogue through a personal commitment to the concrete reality of each person's life. In the face of mortifying individualism, this cultural covenant, this cultural pact can recognize that everyone and every group, including ethnic groups, has a place in building a world of mutual respect. It implies that everyone agrees to relate their interests to the primary defense of the common good, of the common goods, we could also say. It requires that political and economic structures be placed at the service of this common good, at the service of every human being and of their sustainable development, and not at the service of the selfish pursuit of ever greater but inevitably ephemeral gains. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Archbishop Ulrich, for bringing us into this panel today, the attention and the sensibility of Pope Francis for the Mediterranean area that is historically a region of living together with all the fragmentations and difficulties, but that is also a region of future for his young people and for his living together. So thank you very much. Thank you for all our panelists for these very interesting points of view. And I think we thank our publicum for their attention, their listening, and now it's up to you. Who wants to have a question or to have a remark or a comment? They can just raise his hand, and I think we will bring the mic. Yes, please. I propose that we will collect some remarks, and afterwards the panelists can respond everyone on the theme that he wants. Please.
Ich erlaube mir,
I would like to say, dear brothers and sisters, it is wonderful to see you all here in Berlin with us. Well, my personal history is what you have described. The bombs of 1945, my participation in rebuilding also the theater that's next door. The choice to become a consensus objector in the DDR, and then I fled the DDR and then moved to West Germany. And just by mere chance, I'm here. In the local press, I read a lengthy article on a lay religious order, a Catholic order, that I was not aware of until then, the community of Sant'Egidio. And I read this in a local paper, not in a kind of religious publication. And I decided to join Sant'Egidio. And I was asking myself, what can I bring? What is the message that I can bring to my world, to my daily work? Another question I asked myself was the following. What can I say to my friends in Ukraine? What can I tell them? What can I do for them? What kind of message of cooperation can I try to disseminate? And some time ago, I worked in Moscow. I was an engineer, and my colleagues asked me a question. Pavel Pavlovich, that was my name in Russian. Paul, son of Paul, Pavel Pavlovich, where was your father during World War II? And I was forced to admit, which I did, and I had to say, we were together with other Christians and evangelical Protestants in Poland. We asked for forgiveness. We traveled to the concentration camps, and I was not able to kiss the hand of the sister of a survivor in Wrocław. I felt embarrassed, but then later on, I invited this individual to come and live with us. And I'm very pleased to see here confrère, the Archbishop of Paris, our brother, actually. And recently, I went to the exhibition dedicated to the St. Bartholomew Massacre, this horrible moment in history. And now you, my brother, are here in the French church. My heart is with you. And now, I've moved back to my community here in Berlin-Brandenburg, my ecclesiastical community, and I would like to bring a message from the Islamic. I would like to bring a message to my friends and who are Muslims. I have the Quran next to the Bible in my room, and we have helped refugees who find a home for months, for years. We helped our Muslim friends. And then I had to tell this young man, I have a Quran for you if you want to pray. He almost didn't know what to do with it, despite the fact that he was a Muslim. And together we started reading the Quran. So, dear friends, dear brothers and sisters, dear Muslim brothers and sisters, I apologize for having had the audacity to approach your sacred book. And then I explained basically, I wondered what Allah asks from every man and woman. And this is a question for our young people here. As you heard, I was born during World War II. So when you will leave this hall, please keep sharing stories of peace. And let us try once again to send this message to Ukraine, to Russia. And I will be translating my words. My dear brothers and sisters, Я христианский. I am Christian. We're still able to speak with our friends in the Orthodox faith. And if you have a project here at the community of Sant'Egidio, well, let us bring this project to Russia. Let's just get on a plane. I would also like to talk to my co-workers in the engineering office where I used to work to say good morning to them as well. Can we talk with you as well? Thank you.
Here. Here. And then the young man there, okay.
Thank you very much for that beautiful presentations. Very enlightening. I'm Raja from India. So my concern is that in a shattered world, when everything is against people, the economy is against people, very aggressive, education is against people, aggressive, competitive, media is against people, political system is against people, ordinary people, we tend to look at religion as a possibility for relief, where we learn how to live together. But in the recent past, what is happening is weaponization of religion. Religion has become a weapon against poor people. You see that in Myanmar and Sri Lanka, what Buddhism did to the minority. You see that in Iran and Afghanistan, what Islam can do. You can also witness that in India, where Hinduism can do to minority. So weaponization of religion has become a reality of the world. So the question is, where do we look to for lessons of living together? Because even religion is not offering that possibility. So I want to know your idea in terms of how do we address this situation in the world today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have the young man.
Hallo, ich würde gerne eine politische Frage stellen, jetzt nicht.
Good morning. I would like to ask a political question. Introduce yourself. My name is Robert. I'm here with my high school class from an evangelical high school. And now we are working on a project, and the title is The Audacity of Peace. This is why we're here. And I would like to ask a question regarding the war in Ukraine and the European army. Do you think it is that absurd to consider this option, setting up a European army? Because when war broke out in Ukraine, I really was shocked when I learned about these news. Really, I grew up in a context of peace, and I never thought that a war could break out in Europe. I thought that I felt very uncertain, because you never know what can happen. You cannot really negotiate with individuals like Vladimir Putin. And so it would make sense to think about a defensive stance and an army in Europe in case Russia decided to attack Germany.
There.
My name is Jamie Maya, Sant'Egidio, Wolfsburg. We are talking about art of living together. But I thank all the speakers. They have talked all what is needed in this world. But the dominance and sometimes discrimination, the big people, big countries, you will find out we are not living together, especially the third world countries. If you want to come here to get a visa for like a student, I come from Uganda. It is difficult to get a German visa to come to study here. And also discrimination here in Germany at working place. Everywhere getting an apartment is so difficult. And I just want if the laws in Germany, if they can ease the law about visa, about how we live here in Germany. You talked about nuclear. There is no respect of nuclear anymore. The whole world is in fear. We are living in fear. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. Because of big countries. This one say, let us make peace. This one say, no, let us continue the war. They are in Africa, they are where? Everywhere, Arab countries, the big people. We have to make peace to live in this world. For example, in Uganda, we have signed a law, no more homosexual in Uganda. But the big people say, oh, Uganda, why do you sign this law? We don't give you any support anymore. The World Bank stopped us from getting money from the bank. So I can see every country has got its own culture. In Germany here, you cannot get married to 4 women. In Uganda, you can get married to 4 women in Africa. But nobody complain about it. But if we sign a law of not having homosexual, why do you interfere? Huh? Why? Huh? We have to live together. Huh? In the art of living together, to accept our culture, to respect every country's culture, not to dominate. So that is all what I have to say. Thank you very much. You have talked everything, and thank you for coming to this interesting forum.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam. There is another young man.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bogdan, and I'm from Ukraine, and I represent a Ukrainian side in some way. I'm very thankful to every speaker that have been talking today, and you were talking about the art of living together in a shattered world, and you were living like about some strategy of peace and so on. And I would like to return to a political question that my friend have already asked. Like, unfortunately, like I don't speak German very well, so maybe like he has already asked it. But I would like, what is like, how do you see a solution in situation between Ukraine and Russia? You are saying that we have to get like to one table and have a negotiations. But unfortunately, for example, I'm also like Russians killed my aunt, and like unfortunately you're a bit out of context because you really can get how many war criminals are doing actually in the Russian army. Like they are raping women, kids, and killing a civilian. So really, my question is, how can we do that? Because like nowadays, we can't have a peace in this world when Russia like exists in this way, how she now exists. So that was my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. I think we will we have already a lot of questions and comments, so we will have a first tour of responses. If you agree, we pass the mic and we begin from there. Okay. Can we have another microphone? No. Okay.
Just one comment on what has been said about religion, and then on another comment about Ukraine. It has all repeatedly said that all wars in the name of religion are wars against religion. But this is a beautiful expression. It has been repeated time and again. But I think our responsibility as people of faith is to show how we can bring together our spiritual, moral resources, not only to dissociate our religions from wars, but also to see how our religions can stop wars and can build peace. That's a more difficult part of it, and I think we spend more energy saying that this conflict has nothing to do with our religions. Our religions are above this misuse. It's not enough to condemn misuse. It's good to disentangle ways in which our religions are used and use their resources for peace. My second comment is about Ukraine. I think it's important to characterize the conflict in Ukraine. Russia has launched a war of aggression on Ukraine, a war of aggression, breaking international law, not recognizing international borders, not respecting the independence of Ukraine. But Russia tries to characterize this war as a war against the West, as a proxy war. They say they're not fighting the Ukrainians, they're fighting the Americans and the Europeans. And I think it's essential for Americans and Europeans not to fall into Putin's trap by looking at Ukraine as only a place where an international confrontation is happening. I think there is a moral and political obligation to support the Ukrainian people, but it's the Ukrainian people that are fighting for their independence. Anything that would portray this war as a war between the West and Russia is detrimental, I think, to the Ukrainians. It should be a war of dignity and rights for the Ukrainians. It should be support to the Ukrainians because they are victims of aggression. Now, you asked, the second question was about peace. I mean, short of any other perfect way of ending a war, still negotiations is the only way to end the war. Now, are we ready for that negotiation in Ukraine? I don't think so, because the Russians have the illusion of being able to win, to prevail, and they're not ready for any negotiation. Any negotiation doesn't give Ukraine all the rights it has a right to, but any negotiation is with an honorable perspective of peacemaking is better than an open-ended, endless war that has brought so many sufferings for the Ukrainians.
Thank you. I just want to share my very brief response to the issue raised by Mr. Raja from India in relation to religion as uniting factor rather than as dividing factors. I'm working on the ground with many different interfaith dialogue and also interfaith cooperation. And my experience working in Indonesia and also working with Sant'Egidio in many different programs in Indonesia and also in southern Philippines, we see that how religion could become a uniting factor. Muhammadiyah is an Islamic organization, and Sant'Egidio is a Catholic community, but we work together on the ground to help people in education, humanitarian, and in peace. We experience working with many different religions on humanitarian programs and also environmental programs. For example, nowadays in Indonesia we have Humanitarian Forum Indonesia, an interfaith humanitarian movement in Indonesia that work together after the tsunami in Aceh in 2024. And the series of natural disasters happening in the country call people from many different religions to work together on the ground, because illiteracy, poverty have no religions. It is our responsibility as religious people to work together to help them. So I think this experience to put dialogue in action instead of dialogue in statement is more positive in relation to build peace, harmony, and to live together peacefully. Therefore, the thing that we need on the ground is that we need to deepen our understanding on our religions, and we need to develop what we call as positive pluralism that enables us to cross the border, to go beyond the wall of our own private religions. So when it's come to humanity and it's come to responsibility to create a prosperous, a just, and also peaceful world, I think this positive pluralism has become one of the key that people from many different religions could work together and religion could become a uniting factors. And just recently, we worked on the program, namely Eco Bineka. It is a program on environment and also the program that invite people from many different faiths to take seriously the issue of climate change and working together on the ground, that regardless our religious differences, we have common teaching, we have common values that call us to work together to save the world and also to create peace in our earth. Thank you.
J'entends ces questions qui viennent d'être posées et je suis frappé, premier.
I have listened to the various questions addressed, and first and foremost, speaking of Ukraine, I was very struck because since February 2022, we could see that Ukrainians for years have worked to protect and defend their dignity in this present situation. Now, we understand that this invasion that has been going on for the past 18 months is the attempt to deprive them of their dignity. And as far as I understood, analyzing this conflict, my perception is that you Ukrainians for years have tried to always remember that your dignity needed to be always upheld and defended in the best possible way. This struck me very deeply. I'm thinking of a conference which Andrea Riccardi had organized in Lille when I was Archbishop of Lille, and there Riccardi being the founder of the community of Sant'Egidio, and he said that we must never forget war to build peace. Never forget that war is possible. Always remember that war is always possible. And you said that you are surprised. It isn't just that you Ukrainians, we too are surprised. And I could perceive that Ukrainians have never forgotten that war was a possibility, that they needed to be ready, not necessarily to war, but to always defend their dignity. I think this is a crucial point. I've made this point in my presentation, quoting Pope Francis. It is always necessary to lay the foundations, to start movements in favor of peace and have them grow. Time is more important than space. Pope Francis often says this. It is important to set something going, to start a process, to always defend dignity and peace, but never forgetting that war is a possibility. And I would like to conclude by saying that the Pope is inviting us not to forget that this starts from education. Since 3 years ago, the Pope has suggested the creation of a global compact on education, where all parties can learn to respect each other, and where the human being is placed at the very heart, at the very center, so that we never lose sight of the importance of educating young men and women, so that children and young men and women are given an education and enabled to live in our common home. So these are the principles which are being proclaimed by the Pope, and which can act as foundations to set a process going. And then this process can then grow. We cannot expect to have a magic wand with which we can have negotiations ending the war, but we can start this process towards peace. And let me mention an example. When Iraq was invaded, or rather threatened, by ISIS, by Daesh, there was a Catholic bishop who went to Kurdistan. He retired there, and he allowed thousands of students to continue and complete their studies. He asked the French Bishops' Conference to participate by providing funds, so that almost 1,000 young people were able to complete their studies. And a few months back, I went to Iraq to meet Eastern Christians, because I'm also in charge of Oriental Rite, Eastern Rite Catholics. I'm their bishop. So I went to meet them, and I met this young woman, amongst others who were attending this meeting, and she was able to complete her medical training, and at the end of her medical training she decided to stay in Iraq so that she could contribute to the building of peace in her country, also contributing to better and greater dignity for all men and women in Iraq who wish to continue living in the country. So this is a good example, a virtuous example. Never forget that a process needs to be started in favor of peace, and in the long run it's going to produce results.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Many things have already been said. I want to say my answer for Ukraine, reconciliation as a program is not pacifistic in this radical sense. We think that armies are necessary, but the goal should be to overcome this weaponization of the world and this many billions giving for military. And in the Ukraine case, I opted publicly to give as soon as possible as many weapons as possible to Ukraine to end this madness, but then to go for reconciliation and for peace. And the other thing, the lady from Uganda, you reminded me a quote of Dan Bar-On, a Jewish psychologist, German origin, who made a lot for reconciliation with Germany and also with Palestinians. And he said an enemy is somebody whose story you would not have heard yet. And I think in Germany, many people don't believe that there is such a discrimination to African people. And I think we should listen more to voices like yours, because it is. I know how difficult it is to get visa. Our students often have a lot of work to get visas to study, and it's also a lot of disrespect for people from Africa in Europe, and suspicion and not equal treatment. And the society should listen to those stories and learn more about it. But I also react on what you said about the law on homosexuality in Uganda. When I was young, also in Germany, homosexuality was forbidden by law. And a very important moment in my life was when somebody who went to school with me told me that he is homosexual and he is thinking about suicide, because he was completely desperate. He discovered this in himself and he did not know how to live. And therefore, I think it could be also a fruit of an exchange between us. That, of course, I think we should not have people in such a situation in Uganda, that people are thinking about suicide because they discover that they are homosexual. There should be another way, even respecting your feelings, which were mine also when I was young, that it is completely strange that somebody could love a man. This is completely unnatural, but it exists. Yeah, thank you.
Friends, two very thoughtful observations were made on religion, and I would like to give my response to these two observations. We had an enlightened citizen from Berlin who asked this question: what can I do to my shattered world? But he answered the question himself by narrating how, being a Christian, he offered the Holy Quran to a Muslim and then read it together. So in a very small but very significant way, he showed how the art of living together can be practiced. Yesterday, at the reception hosted by the Italian ambassador, the president of the community of Sant'Egidio, Mr. Marco Impagliazio, he made a very pertinent observation. He said, when representatives of various religions come together to call for peace, they re-establish the credibility of religion. They re-establish the credibility of religion. They re-establish the dependability of religion, that religion can offer a response
to forces that seek to divide the world and that seek to create conflicts in our common family. Now this brings me to the other observation that my very dear friend Rajgopalji from India, he said that even though all religions, they propagate the teaching of living together, and this was also a point made by our chairperson today, Ms. Hilda, who said that living together is in the DNA of every religion. At the same time, we cannot deny the fact that religion is also weaponized to divide our world. So, is there a way in which religion can fight the weaponization of religion? Now, I recall a teaching of Mahatma Gandhi. As some of you perhaps know, he coined a very unique method of fighting the British imperialism for India's independence. And that method was called Satyagraha. Satyagraha means insistence on truth. Satya means truth, and Satyagraha means insistence on truth. That India is fighting for independence because British imperialism stands for untruth. Furthermore, Gandhiji also said that truth is God. Truth is God. And therefore, when we are working for truth, when we are insisting on truth, we are also telling the world that this Christian nation, Britain, is ungodly. It's anti-religion. And in the course of explaining this philosophy of Satyagraha, Mahatma Gandhi said that this insistence on truth, which means this insistence on true religion, true path to God, is a moral equivalent of war. It's a very a strange explanation. That insist on soon truth is a moral equivalent of war. That this is the way in which religion can be used as a weapon against weaponization of religion for dividing society and for creating wars of destruction. Which means that we must understand religion in its true sense. Religion as a source of morality. Religion as a source of uniting humanity and uniting, in fact, the entire creation of God. So, if each of us understand our respective religions better and follow our religion in their true light, we can bring humanity together. And this brings me to the last point, friends, that our friend from Indonesia, Abdul Mukti, he said that Indonesia believes not just in unity in diversity, but unity is diversity. Unity is diversity, which means that respect and acceptance of diversity of all religions is the way to establish unity of humanity. Thank you, friends.
We have been saying a lot of things, and perhaps there are much more remarks and questions in our hearts, but I think it's time for a conclusion, if this is possible, to make a conclusion on this so important theme. We've heard inputs from so different places in the world. The woman that testimonied about the difficulty of integration when you are an African migrant in Europe, in Germany. We talked about Asia, India and Indonesia. We talked about the Mediterranean area and living together there. We touched a lot of painful points and crises of our world, and not at least the Ukrainian crisis. I think the importance of meetings like this is that we take the time to be together and to try to understand together and to speak one to each other. And I would like to thank for their presence among us the priests and bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church that are in Germany and that are living these days with us in a very difficult situation, of course, for their church too. So this is a very complex world with complex problems. This is not an... So I think even if we are in front of very complex problems, and I'm touched by the young man that expressed his fear for the future and his preoccupation, and it is beautiful, I think, that an older and a younger generation of this city of Berlin gathers in this meeting by the first intervention and the one of the younger ones. So in this city of Berlin, with this painful history, we are trying to be together and to understand the future of our world, that we said, all of us are living together. I just wanted to end by saying that if this afternoon we will be at the Brandenburger Tor, that is the symbol of the division of the wall of this city, and we will pass through it from one side to the other, that had been impossible for so many decades. I join the feelings, if this is possible, of the people of Berlin, but we are all Berliners now, that this is a highly emotional moment. And I would say that in the ceremony of this afternoon, we will understand that it's true that everything can change, even if we don't see exactly how crisis will be managed and solved. But the only thing we know, and that I think we share all, is this will of listening to each other in respect and to build a common destiny and a common future. So I really thank our panelists for all their contributions. I thank every one of you for his presence, for his remarks, and I wish every one of us a beautiful afternoon of peace and being together. Thank you.